The floods used to come up there too.
We experienced big floods in the 90s.
And in a flood, we get cut off.
I don't know whether anybody else has told you about the 55 flood.
I think you got a photo of the flood.
The 1955 flood, I think, was still the biggest flood.
And I remember going across the Mary River when she was in a big flood.
And the 99 flood washed a couple of spans away.
We had a very big 92 and 94 floods.
I got a job in the sawmill, then I went to national service in 54 and went back to Greenbank in 55 when the flood come to Gympie, and we come across from Traverson with a foot of water in a steam train, coming back to Gympie from Greenbank. I couldn't get home to Ambermore because the creek was all flooded, so I stayed with people in town here, and they had a truck, and we went round shifting people out of their houses that were getting flooded. Just across the rails there from where they are now, where the turntable is, they used to have drums of stuff there, and they floated away in floods there. And it also went under the railway line down near the bridge. And the reason being, they got a downpour up the creek, and it come down too quick. And where the bridge is over the creek there, Admiral Creek railway bridge, is narrow, and it couldn't take all the water. And we walked down there, two brothers and myself, we walked down there to have a look. And the water was up here on the bridge, and it was down there on the bottom side because it couldn't get through. Too much water, yes. So it all built up and finished up running all the level of what it was on the top side of the bridge and went under the railway line.
But on the farm, we experienced everything. We experienced big floods in the 90s. I remember we had we are on the Ambermore Creek, and we had a flat, and we had all these trees which were in bags, like 3-liter bags, and they were all crafted, all in rows, ready to plant, and then come the flood. The Ambermore Creek come up and up and up, and then all the bags were swimming away. Yeah, we lost a lot. And that was in the 90s. So we had good floods in the 90s, and then you're always cut off. I've never seen a flood in Gympie, but because when we have a flood in Ambermore, we can't go into Gympie, so you don't see the Mary River. So now I'm living in Gympie and I'm waiting to see the Mary River and flood, which never happened. So
that's something I do miss is the wet season. We haven't had, there's been a bit of stuff on social media at the moment about 10 years since the horrible floods in the Lockyer Valley and Gympie, like Brisbane, it was very widespread, and you miss that flood rain. It can be detrimental, and you certainly don't want the flood rain that's going to be damaging. But we don't have our water holes; they're full, but it's a green drought. We still don't have that depth of the water table that we need. We've got a billabong behind our house, and it's not full, so the water table is not there yet. But we've got grass up to our shoulders. But we live on what they call Imbil Island, so it's surrounded by the Anna branch of Yabba Creek. So you have Yabba Creek and then you have the Anna branch, and there's a bridge at each end of the flat, and in a flood we get cut off. So it's only for a couple of days because it comes up and goes down very quickly, but it's certainly a way of life that is integral to the value of the place as a farming community as well. You do, and with a lot of new people moving, they don't know. Like we all know that this little crossing here will go under in this amount of rain and so forth, and they're also not. They don't have pantry items like we do. They live very much week to week or day to day or whatever, and so the fear of not being able to get anything. But we had a run, a few months ago on toilet paper and bread because they were talking about a rain event. And that's the other thing, the weather reporting is like, we have to warn people, so there's a rain event coming, but it deteriorates into a dribble. Well, when we were Waluga, Bells Bridge would go under, start of school, the Valley or Bells Bridge would be cut off and you'd miss those first few days or weeks. My daughter was wanted to have a sleepover in the last week of the holidays at Christmas and with a friend in Gympie, and we said, oh yeah, and she said, oh, but there's some rain around, they're talking about floods. I'm going, it won't flood. She was there for 3 days. No. And also it took out some major power pole infrastructure in Imbil, and so we had a fridge full because we kill our own meat. So we had a fridge full of meat and she was stuck in town. It was just one of those dramas.
Well, that house withstood the 55 flood. I don't know whether anybody else has told you about the 55 flood. Imbil was cut off for almost a fortnight. Nobody had heard, there was no outside communication or anything. We were cut off for 14 days. They ended up getting army ducks in to get us off the showgrounds. That's where we all were. And one morning, the creek was still rising because we were right on the creek. And Mum had gone up to visit Auntie Dulcie, who was Uncle Jack's wife, but she was also Mum's sister. So 2 sisters married 2 brothers. So Mum had gone up to visit Auntie Dulcie and Dad was left to look after me. And he went to sleep. Mum came back and I'm dangling my feet off the back. I'm 2 years old, only 2 years old, dangling my feet off the back veranda in the flood. That house withstood that flood, but when we pulled it down, it didn't have a single nail in it that wasn't rusted through.
When the flood used to flood down here, you got no way of getting out. The only way was back up here, right through the forestry. I used to go through there, I knew the back road, and pick up bread and all that sort of thing. One day we come back, we got stuck there. So you know what I did? Put half a dozen loaves of bread under the wheels and got out. But I went through there a lot of times, because I knew the ways. Yeah. I think you got a photo of the flood. Yeah. Well, that flood, Alec Hugh is accounting them there, so there was about only half a dozen to count, the rest all the way at Easter time it was. So we had to go down to pull pontoons out the water, dozers and all that stuff so it wouldn't flood. So when it come to pay time, they said to Alec, what are you going to pay these men for doing all that work? He said, I'll pay them for time. We got 4 hours to pay for every hour we worked. That was just straight through there. Yeah. But we used to get flooded out. You couldn't drive to town because of the bridges. So I knew the track through the forestry. Used to go right through the back way to get bread and stuff for them, supplies, 55, I had to go back to Greenbank to finish my training. And we all got to Gympie here and we couldn't get back out to the valley. So the army duck picked us up after went through Mary Street and smashed the window. And it took us out, there's 3 of us went out into duck out Imbil. Now, the regular army from Brisbane, for that sort of thing, I think I only had to go through that forestry road, Sis, what about 3 or 4 times, I suppose? Only 4-wheel drive. There wasn't many 4-wheel drives on either, see, most people had cars, so I had to use the Citra vehicles to go through,
The 1955 flood, I think, was still the biggest flood ever, and we were living like right beside the creek, and Mum and Dad took us up the top of the hill because they were worried the water might come up and flood into the town, which it never did, though some people think it did. It didn't. But yeah, we haven't really got any photos of... Yes, well, there used to be a mark on the pylons of the railway bridge of how high it came. I think that's worn out. Where our house was, we were on the creek, but it was a steep bank, so you couldn't really see the water. But where I was sleeping, I can remember it rained all night. Sitting up in bed the next morning looking out, and here was the water. Well, there's a story, the garage down the bottom end of town that always goes under in any sort of a flood, and the mechanic's wife was at the pub, and she rang up the pub and said, you better come home, the water's up to my ankles. And he said, all right, I'll just finish my beer. And she said, you better drink it quickly because it's up to my waist now. I mean, there's a fair bit of exaggeration there, I suppose, but our chook house was right down on the edge of the creek, and I think I think they must have got the chooks out. And then, because we're next to the post office, Mum was friends with the postmistress, and they both decided that they'd just go down and see how high the water had come up. And they walked out and sort of stepped into it. I mean, we've had a couple of 2011, 2013, they were pretty big, but not as big as that. We were cut off for, 2 weeks or something, but after 2 weeks you could get out of Imbil. But that's when the powers that be decided they'd better check up and see how people in Imbil were. So they sent a helicopter, but we'd been coming and going for days. They brought an army duck, because the bridge was washed away. I think that was the first time the bridge was washed away. There's been a few since then. The original bridge didn't have sides on it, and now with all the laws they've got to put sides up. So when the big logs come down the river, the bridge was washed away in 1992 or 98 or something I don't really remember what it looked like, but and then the approaches to it were washed away in the next two big floods. Well, there's so much weed growing on the creek now, it just needs not a big flood, but a flood.
Well, in 1964 we built a new home. A big home, because our family was fastly growing. We had 7 children, and the old house. And not only that, I was looking after my dad, who was invalided, and we just didn't have enough room. So we built a new home, 4 bedrooms, and we built it sort of maybe at the base of the hills, and the floods. I forget what year that was. Jeff, you might remember the big floods. Anyway. The house moved. The house was a big home, and you could put a marble on the floor and it would roll down, and the windows wouldn't shut and the doors wouldn't shut. So our home, we had to have it cut in. It was chamfer board. Had to have it cut in half. 2 halves were brought on a big truck to Gympie. We bought a 5-acre block on Fisher Road, where we still are, and we erected that house there, high, and had concrete underneath. We've since sold that and built a new house next door. My husband's good on years. I can't remember what year it was now, but it's where we live now. And I remember going across the Mary River when she was in a big flood boat, and at domestic science, we'd made this baked custard at school, and it wasn't a very smooth journey across. Things lurched and spilled all down here, and I thought, oh my gosh, looks like I've been sick. I'll never forget that. But I can't remember who came and picked me up that day to take me home.
Infrastructure projects have been most of my life. I remember in the early 80s, the road from Bruloo to Kenilworth over the range was gravel. We had to design and build that. Just behind me here is a bridge which has got quite a history. I can remember being in charge of redecking the bridge. It was a timber bridge in the early 80s, the very early 80s. Then in 99, the 99 flood washed a couple of spans away, and that was a particularly interesting time for me. I had in the previous year to that been lucky enough to be in Tasmania, where Australia's second oldest bridge at a town called Ross in the Midlands had this amazing arch span bridge. And when this bridge washed away, we specified to the architects that we wanted a bridge that resembled the Ross Bridge, which was an arch bridge. It was very strong on my agenda because I believed Imbil deserved a beautiful bridge. And look, the long story came to an end when we got the money and we got the design we wanted, and we built it, and we actually won a national award for it as well. So the bridge is part of my story and my contribution to the valley.
We had a very big 92 and 94 floods. We had a lot of bank erosion, and it became quite obvious to me that we had to do something drastically to save from losing a lot of land. And of course, where the soil was going was the banks. When they're unstable, the soil ends up down Harvey Bay and plumes of sediment and affects the seagrasses and the dugong's population. So lots of flow-on effects. So it was at that time that I convinced our family to fence off the river from stock. And it was about 95 that we actually put in troughs and gravity fed, pump water up to tanks and gravity fed it back through the property. So we had the cattle off the river. And that's particularly important because not only was allowing for natural regeneration to occur on the riverbanks, it was also improving the water quality. The cattle are not down in the water, polluting the water. So that was a big, I think, from starting to look after the environment. I then became very interested in growing my own trees and planting. So when I came back, 94, I permanently came back because my father said he'd like to go travelling, and so I decided I would come back, and I grew a lot of my own trees and collected my own seed, the native seed from around the area. I became involved with World Wide Fund for Nature. I did part-time work with them for 3 years. So I picked up on my knowledge of what plants were important, the riparian rainforest and the importance of that, the shading component for controlling the temperatures, water temperatures and things. So, and the importance of wildlife corridors as well. So there was a big chunk of information that I was able to learn. But when I first came back in 94, I really didn't feel like I knew too many people in the community. Even though I'd grown up, I'd gone away and come back. And I think that happens with a lot of people, that they come back and you've got to reconnect with the community and become involved in activities. And so I think it's important to have that balance in life, that you've got not only the work part of it, but you have the opportunities to interact with the community and contribute to the community and improve things on that basis. So the 92 and the 94 big floods were the pivoting point in the management of improving things for the environment and the river from our farming perspective.